The city square was packed with people from all over the galaxy. The towering skyscrapers of the alien city cast long shadows, and the distant hum of air vehicles filled the air. The planet's citizens gathered, standing in tense silence. Today was a day for punishment, and the crowd eagerly waited to witness the public execution of an alien woman named Zara. Zara, with her delicate yet strong features, stood tall on the execution platform, her pale blue skin shimmering faintly. Under the harsh light, set her apart as an alien from another world. Her long silver hair flowed gently down her back, and her large, expressive eyes, though filled with sorrow, held no fear. She knew what was coming, and in the face of it, she remained calm. Zara had been accused of a crime she did not commit. The rulers of this planet, an empire that had long been in control of countless worlds, needed to send a message to their people. They accused her of betrayal, of defying the empire's laws, but the truth was far from what they said. Zara had been nothing but a voice of peace, a diplomat seeking to ease the tensions between her people and the empire. Unfortunately, her good intentions had made her a target. The crowd murmured as the executioner stepped forward. The man, tall and imposing, wore black armor with gold markings, a symbol of his role in the government's oppressive rule. He carried a large energy blade, one that could slice through metal like it was paper. The crowd watched in hushed anticipation, their eyes fixed on the platform. Some cheered, others remained silent, but all were waiting for the moment when Zara's life would be extinguished. Standing in the back of the crowd, a human soldier named Yolan watched the scene unfold. He had arrived on the planet only a few weeks ago, part of a peacekeeping force sent to maintain order. However, as he observed the proceedings, a growing sense of unease stirred within him. He had seen many terrible things during his years of service, but this felt wrong. The way the crowd cheered, the way they had been manipulated into supporting this execution, it made him sick. Yolan was a tall man, his strong build hidden beneath the standard military uniform of the Earth's Federation. He had seen battlefields, alien worlds, and the harsh realities of war. But the sight of an innocent woman about to die for a crime she did not commit hit him harder than any combat injury. He had never felt this helpless before. As the executioner raised the blade, preparing to strike, Jalen's heart pounded. He couldn't stand by and watch this, not when he knew she was innocent. His fingers tightened into fists, and he felt the weight of his decision press down on him. He could relieve this planet and pretend he had never seen what was happening, but something inside him screamed that he couldn't. Not now. Without thinking, Jalan pushed his way through the crowd, his boots stomping on the stone ground. As he made his way to the front of the platform, the crowd parted for him, surprised by his sudden movement, but none of them stopped him. His determination was clear, and they seemed to sense that this human was about to do something no one had ever done before. The executioner turned to face him, a sneer curling on his lips as he glared at Yolan. "What do you think you're doing? Human?" The executioner's voice boomed, his hands still gripping the handle of the deadly weapon. "This is not your business." Yolan didn't flinch. His eyes locked on the alien woman Zara, her face a mask of quiet dignity, despite the situation. She had never expected to be saved, but he couldn't leave her to die alone. He had to do something. He had to stop this madness. "This is wrong," Yolan said, his voice firm and loud enough for the crowd to hear. "She doesn't deserve this. She didn't commit any crime." The executioner let out a laugh, mocking Jalan's words. "I defied the Empire's laws, and that is enough to condemn her. The sentence is already decided. Now, step aside. Get." But Yolan stood his ground.
No, not until you listen.
"You can't just kill someone because it's convenient for your empire." The crowd stirred, murmurs of confusion and surprise rippling through them. The tension in the air was thick, the atmosphere charged with nervous energy. Some were beginning to question the decision, but they still feared the power of the government. Jalen's sudden outburst had broken the silence, and for a moment, there was a flicker of hope in Zara's eyes. "I don't care what the Empire says," Jalen continued, his voice gaining strength. "This is a life, and it matters. She matters." The executioner stepped forward, raising his blade. "If you don't move, human, I will have you arrested for interfering in imperial business. You will face the consequences." Jalen's eyes never wavered from Zara's. He knew the risks. He knew the consequences. But the thought of standing by while an innocent woman was killed made his blood run cold. With one final breath, he took a step closer to the executioner. "I'll take the consequences, but I won't let this happen." Before the executioner could react, Yolan made his move. He reached out, grabbing the hilt of the energy blade, and with all his strength, he yanked it from the executioner's grip. The crowd gasped, stunned by the sudden act of defiance. The soldiers standing nearby raised their weapons, preparing to act, but they hesitated. No one had ever dared to challenge the law in such a way before. Zara's eyes widened as she watched the human intervene. The moment felt surreal. She had accepted her fate, but now, for the first time in a long while, she saw a glimmer of hope. Could this human really save her? Was this the chance she had been waiting for? The executioner roared in anger, but Yolan didn't back down. He held the blade with both hands, the power of it thrumming through him. This was his stand. This was his moment to make a choice, to either stand for justice or turn away. With his heart pounding, Yolan turned to Zara. "Run," he whispered. "I'll protect you." Zara hesitated for a moment, unsure of what was happening. But then, as if realizing the chance she'd been given, she nodded. She turned and ran, disappearing into the crowd. The resistance had begun. The crowd was in shock. For a moment, no one moved. The executioner stood frozen, glaring at Yolan, who still held the energy blade tightly in his hands. Duh! The weapon thrummed with power, but Yolan knew it wasn't the weapon that made him a threat. It was the act of defiance itself. The entire square seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Zara, now on the run, disappeared into the chaos of the crowd. Her long silver hair flowed behind her as she ran with a speed she never thought possible. Her mind raced. The sudden act of rebellion, the human who had stepped in to save her, was something she had never expected. Her people had never received help like this. In the back of her mind, she had always believed that her fate was sealed, that the Empire's control was too strong to be overcome. But now, there was hope, a real hope. Yolan didn't take his eyes off the executioner. His heart raced as the weight of the situation sank in. He had defied the law. He had just taken a step no one from his kind had ever dared to take on this planet. The Empire would not forgive him for this. The punishment would be severe there. Would be no way out. But the thought of standing aside while Zara died didn't even feel like a choice. He couldn't live with himself if he did nothing. The executioner's voice broke the silence. "You foolish human," he spat, stepping closer, his eyes filled with hatred. "You will pay for this. No one defies the Empire." Yolan stood tall, his face set in a determined expression. He had come here to help keep the peace. But what peace could there be when innocent people were being slaughtered in cold blood? His voice was calm but firm as he spoke. "I don't care what you think. This isn't justice. You can't just kill her because it's convenient for your empire." The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. The soldiers surrounding the platform shifted nervously, unsure of what to do. This wasn't part of the plan. They had been trained to follow orders without question, but now they were faced with something unexpected. A human had stepped forward, challenging everything they had been taught to believe in. Yolan took a deep breath and slowly placed the energy blade on the ground, showing that he wasn't looking for a fight. But the message had already been sent. He wasn't afraid. And Zara's life was worth more than the Empire's laws. The crowd, which had once been eager for blood, now looked uncertain. Some of the onlookers started to whisper among themselves. They had seen the human's courage, and for the first time, a small seed of doubt began to take root in their minds. Was the Empire truly in the right? Were they really the ones in control of what was just? A few brave souls in the crowd, emboldened by Jalen's actions, began to speak up. "Let her go!" one of them shouted. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Another voice joined in. "She deserves her freedom, not death." The executioner's anger flared at the voices of dissent. He turned to his soldiers and barked, "In order, seize the human." and anyone else who dares to challenge us." But as the soldiers began to move, Yalan held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm just trying to stop an injustice." His voice was steady, despite the fear gnawing at the pit of his stomach. He knew that the longer he stood here, the more likely it was that the authorities would come for him. They would consider him a threat, a symbol of rebellion, and rebellion would not be tolerated. Zara had made it to the edge of the crowd. Could hear the shouting behind her, the call to arms, but she didn't dare look back. She was too focused on her escape. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe that someone had actually saved her. A human had stepped forward to defy the Empire for her, but she knew this wouldn't end well for him. The Empire wouldn't tolerate any form of resistance, especially from an outsider. She had no idea who this human was, but she would never forget his bravery. Her mind raced as she tried to think of her next move. The underground resistance group. She had heard about the one that worked to undermine the Empire's rule might be her only hope now. But how could she trust anyone? And what about the human who had just risked his life for her? As she pushed through the alleyways, trying to get as far from the square as possible, her mind was still on Yalan. He had changed everything. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a chance. Meanwhile, back at the square, Yalan was still holding his ground. The soldiers had stopped advancing for the moment, unsure of how to respond to his calm but determined stance. The crowd had become divided. Some still supported the execution, but others were starting to feel uneasy. Yalan could feel the power of the moment. He wasn't just protecting one life. He was challenging an entire system. He was standing up for the principle of justice. But his victory, if it could even be called that, was short-lived. A loud roar sounded from the distant gates of the square, signaling the arrival of the Empire's enforcers. The true power of the Empire was coming to take control of the situation.
Yalan's heart sank.
He had no illusions that this would end peacefully. The authorities would come, and when they did, they would bring more soldiers, more weapons. The crowd started to panic as they saw the enforcers approach. But for Yalan, there was no turning back now. He had already made his choice. And now, Zara's fate was tied to his. Zara, though far away, knew the sound of the enforcers' arrival all too well. The Empire would stop at nothing to maintain control. But she couldn't stop now. She had to find the resistance. And with or without Yalan, she had to keep running. The fight was just beginning. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the streets as the Empire's enforcers marched into the square. Their black armor glinted under the harsh lights, and their faces were hidden behind dark helmets. They were an imposing force, trained to strike fear into the hearts of anyone who dared oppose the Empire. The soldiers moved with military precision, their movements synchronized, and the crowd parted for them like water around a stone. Yalan stood his ground, still holding the energy blade, his chest heaving with each breath. The fear he had felt earlier was now replaced by a sense of determination. His decision to intervene had set everything in motion. There was no turning back. The enforcers were here, and soon they would make their move. "Move aside, human," one of the enforcers barked, his voice deep and cold. He stepped forward, his gloved hand reaching for Jalen's shoulder. "You've made a grave mistake." Yalan didn't budge. "I'm not moving," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. "You can't just kill her. She doesn't deserve this." Enforcer's eyes narrowed behind his visor. "You dare defy the Empire," he growled, taking another step forward. "You will pay the price for your insolence." Yalan was well aware of the consequences. The Empire had a long history of crushing any form of rebellion, no matter how small. But he couldn't let this injustice happen, not while he had a chance to stop it. As the enforcers continued to close in, a voice from the crowd broke the tension. "He's right," the voice said. It was quiet at first, but soon more voices joined in. "She doesn't deserve to die. The Empire is wrong." The enforcers froze, and Yalan looked up, surprised to see some of the crowd now standing with him. It was a small but significant shift. The people who had once eagerly awaited the execution were now questioning the Empire's actions. For the first time, they were starting to see the truth. One of the enforcers turned sharply to the crowd, his hand resting on the handle of his blaster. "Anyone who dares challenge the Empire will be dealt with swiftly," he warned, his voice full of threat, but the words did little to quiet the crowd. If anything, they only fueled their defiance. More voices rose in support of Yalan and Zara. The realization spread through the people perhaps it was time to stand up. It's time to take action against the Empire's tyranny. Jalan could see the shift. In the crowd, the subtle change in the way they were looking at him, but it wasn't enough. The enforcers weren't about to back down, and he knew that the moment they realized Zara was gone, they would come after her with everything they had. Before the enforcers could act, a new voice spoke from the back of the crowd. "He's right, and I'll stand with him." Yalan turned to see a tall alien man step forward, his blue skin glowing faintly in the light. He had sharp features, and his eyes were filled with fire. He was different from the others. The man's stance was strong, defiant, and his presence commanded attention. "My name is Kalen," the alien said, his voice carrying across the square. "And I've seen enough. The Empire's rule must end." Yalan raised an eyebrow. Oh. Kalen's words were a declaration, not just for the moment, but for the future. Yalan didn't know who this alien was, but he could see the fire in his eyes, the same fire that burned in his own heart. Kalen wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for those who had been silenced. Those who had lived under the Empire's boot for far too long. The enforcers took a step back, wary of the growing movement. The crowd was no longer just a passive group of bystanders. They were becoming something more. They were becoming a force. And that was something the Empire couldn't control. "You can't defeat us," one of the enforcers said, trying to regain his composure. "The Empire is eternal. You cannot stop us." Yalan took a step forward, his hand still gripping the energy blade. "I'm not trying to defeat you," he said, his voice steady. "I'm trying to protect what's right." The enforcers' eyes flickered with uncertainty, but the moment didn't last. The sound of more footsteps echoed in the distance reinforcements. The Empire wasn't going to let this rebellion go unpunished. Kalen turned to Yolan, his expression grim. "We need to get out of here, now. The Empire will not let us live once they've seen what we've started." Yalan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Where can we go?" "There's a safe house," Kalen said, motioning toward a narrow alleyway at the edge of the square. "Follow me." The two men, along with a handful of brave citizens who had dared to stand with them, began to move toward the alley. But before they could make it, the enforcers closed in again. They raised their weapons, ready to fire. Jalan's pulse quickened, but he didn't hesitate. He had made his choice. Kalen acted first. With lightning speed, he grabbed Jalan's arm and yanked him toward the alley. The sound of blaster fire rang out, but the shots missed. The group ran as fast as they could, ducking behind walls and scrambling through side streets. Jalan's mind raced as he kept pace with Kalen. He had been trained to fight, but this wasn't a battle. This was an escape. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for a mission. He was fighting for something more personal. He was fighting for justice. As they rounded a corner and disappeared into the alley, Yalan glanced back at the square. The Empire's soldiers were still on their tail, but for now, they had managed to evade them. The hope that had ignited in the crowd was still there, but it was fleeting. The Empire would come for them, but they had one advantage now: the people were starting to wake up, and that could change everything. The narrow alley was dark, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed off the walls. Jalen's heart pounded in his chest as he ran, pushing himself faster than he ever had before. He had never imagined that a simple moment of bravery would lead to such chaos. But now, with the Empire's enforcers hot on his heels, he didn't have time to think about what had happened. He only had time to run. Beside him, Kalen moved with swift precision, his glowing blue skin barely visible in the shadows. He was used to running from the Empire, used to hiding in plain sight. This wasn't the first time he had fought for freedom, and it wouldn't be the last. But now, with Yalan by his side and Zara's fate hanging in the balance, it felt different. It felt personal. We need to move faster, Kalen said, glancing over his shoulder. The enforcers will be closing in soon. They won't stop until they've caught us. Yalan nodded, his breath coming in quick gasps. He wasn't a runner. His military training had always been focused on combat, on strategy, on staying in. One place to defend or attack. But now, he was running for something much bigger than himself. He was running for the future, for Zara. For the hope that had sparked in the hearts of the people, they turned another corner, their shoes slipping on the wet pavement. The rain had started falling just moments before they had made their escape, and it seemed to match the tense atmosphere. The streets were slick, making it harder to move quickly, but they couldn't slow down. Behind them, the enforcers were relentless. The sound of their boots hitting the ground grew louder with every passing second. We can't outrun them forever, Yalan said, his voice strained. We need a plan. Kalen's face was focused, his eyes scanning the alleyways ahead. Know a place. There's a resistance safe house nearby. We'll be able to regroup and plan our next move. Can we trust them? Yalan asked. He wasn't used to trusting anyone, especially not in situations like this. But he had no choice. We're running out of time, and Zara's life depended on them. Kalen didn't hesitate. They've been fighting the Empire for years. They'll help us. Yalan didn't question him further. He trusted Kalen, at least for now. As they reached another corner, Kalen motioned for Yalan to follow. They ducked into a narrow passageway between two buildings, the entrance to a hidden alley that only those familiar with the city knew about. The entrance was small, barely wide enough for two people to squeeze through. But it led to a network of tunnels beneath the city. Safe from the Empire's watchful eyes, the air grew damp as they descended into the tunnels, the smell of wet stone filling Jalen's nose. The only light came from small, flickering lanterns along the walls, casting eerie shadows. It was a strange contrast to the bright lights and open streets above. This was a different world, one where people like Kalen and Zara had lived for years, hidden away from the Empire's prying eyes. Yalan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he walked through the underground tunnels. He had always thought of the resistance as something distant, something that happened in faraway places, not something he would ever be a part of. But now here he was, right in the heart of it. The reality of the situation hit him harder than ever. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that could change everything. They walked for what felt like hours, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the stone walls.
The farther they went,
the quieter it became. Finally, they reached a large, dimly lit chamber where a group of people were waiting. Some of them were humans, like Yalan, while others were alien. Just like Zara, they were sitting around a large table, their eyes focused on a series of maps and data pads spread out in front of them. Welcome, Kalen, one of the men at the table said, his voice low but warm. He stood up, his tall frame towering over the others. His skin was a deep green, and his eyes were sharp, scanning Yalan with an intensity that made Yalan uneasy. This is Yalan, Kalen said, introducing him. He helped save Zara. The Empire is looking for him now. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. I see. We've been expecting you. You're lucky you made it this far. Yalan wasn't sure how to respond. He felt out of place, surrounded by people who had been fighting the Empire for years. He had just stepped into their world, and now he had to prove himself. He couldn't afford to mess up. I don't want to get anyone else in trouble, Yalan said, his voice low. I'm just here to help, Zara. If you can get us to safety, I'll do whatever I can to help. The man smiled, but there was little warmth in it. We don't just help people because they ask, Yalan. The Empire has eyes everywhere. Helping you means taking a risk. But I see the fire in your eyes. You're not just a soldier. You're someone who's willing to fight for what's right. And that's something we need. Yalan felt a surge of determination. He had never been the kind of man to back down from a fight. He'd been trained to protect, to defend, but he had never been asked to fight like this. This wasn't just a war. This was a battle for freedom. We'll need to move quickly, the man continued. The enforcers are already searching the city for you, and they won't stop until they find you. Yalan nodded. He knew the risks, but now he wasn't running just to survive. He was running for a cause, for something that could change the future of this world. And for Zara, as they gathered around the table, making plans for the next step, Yalan couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Despite the danger that surrounded them, they had the resistance on their side, and that was more than he had ever hoped for. Now it was time to take the fight to the Empire. The hidden chamber of the resistance was quiet, save for the low hum of the energy generators that powered the underground safe house. Yolen sat on a rough wooden chair, his mind racing. The plans for the next move had already been discussed, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight, but this was different. It wasn't a war between two factions. It was a fight for freedom, for justice, for people's lives. The room was dimly lit, the glow of scattered datapads casting faint shadows on the walls. Around him, the resistance members were busy preparing for their next steps, strategizing how they could strike back against the Empire. They were all focused, determined, but Yalan felt like an outsider. He had only just joined their cause. And yet, they were counting on him to help bring about change. Could he really do it? Could he stand against the might of the Empire and succeed? His thoughts were interrupted by a voice. Yolan, Kalen said, his tone gentle but firm. He had noticed the troubled look on Jalen's face. You're thinking too much. You've done more in a few days than most of us could have dreamed of. Don't doubt yourself now. Yalan looked up to find Kalen standing in front of him, his arms crossed. The alien's eyes were filled with a mixture of understanding and encouragement. Despite his calm demeanor, Yalan knew Kalen had been through countless struggles himself. The resistance members were used to being in hiding, to fighting from the shadows. But Yalan had come from a different world, a world where he had always followed orders and stayed within the lines. Now everything had changed. I just don't know if I'm ready for this, Yalan confessed, his voice quiet. Back on Earth, I was part of the peacekeeping forces. My job was to maintain order, not to start a rebellion. I don't know if I'm the right person to lead this fight. Kalen's eyes softened, and he sat down beside Yalan. You're not leading this fight, Yalan. We all are. This isn't just about you or me. It's about everyone who's had enough of the Empire's rule. It's about the people who are too afraid to stand up on their own, the ones who need someone to believe in them. You don't have to carry this burden alone. Yalan looked at Kalen, his words sinking in. The resistance wasn't about one person. It was about the unity of those who had suffered under the Empire's oppression. Each one of them had their own reasons for fighting. For Kalen, it was the years spent hiding in the shadows. For Zira, it was the loss of her family and the unjust execution that nearly took her life. For Yolan, it was a new kind of responsibility, one that called on him to fight not for orders, but for a cause greater than himself. Thanks, Yolan said softly, stood up, feeling a weight lifted from his shoulders. The doubt still lingered, but Kalen's words had helped him see the bigger picture. He wasn't alone in this fight. He was part of something much bigger, something that could change the course of history. A few moments later, Zara entered the room, her presence like a quiet storm. Her pale blue skin glowed faintly under the soft light, and her silver hair cascaded around her shoulders like liquid moonlight. Despite the fear and pain she had endured, there was a calm strength in her eyes, strength that came from knowing she was no longer powerless. Yolan stood when he saw her, his respect for her growing. With each passing moment, Zara had faced death and come out the other side, and now she was here, standing beside him as an equal in this fight. I'm sorry for dragging you into this, Zara said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. You didn't have to help. You didn't have to risk your life for someone you barely knew. Yalan shook his head. No one deserves to be treated the way you were. You didn't ask for this, Zara. I just did what I had to do. Zara's gaze softened. Thank you. But this fight isn't just for me. It's for all of us who've been silenced, for all those who've suffered under the Empire's cruelty. Yalan nodded, understanding her words now more than ever. The Empire's rule had spread across countless worlds, crushing anyone who dared to stand against it. But now, with the resistance growing stronger, there was hope. There was a chance to end the Empire's reign and restore freedom to the people. Zara's voice cut through his thoughts. We need to move soon. The The Empire's forces are closing in on our location. I'll find this safe house eventually, and we can't afford to let them catch us. Kalen's face grew serious. We've prepared everything. We'll leave. In the morning, heading for the mountains where we can regroup and plan the next phase of our attack. But we need to be quick and careful. The Empire has eyes everywhere. Yalan felt the tension rise again. He knew the risks. The Empire's enforcers would stop at nothing to find them. But they couldn't afford to wait any longer. Zara's life, and the lives of countless others, depended on their success. This wasn't just about fighting the Empire, it was about standing up for those who had no voice, those who had been forgotten. "I'm ready," Yolan said, his voice firm. "Let's do this." Zara gave him a small smile, her eyes grateful, but determined. "We fight together, Yalan. We fight for a better future." Kalen stood, his posture straightening. "Then let's make sure the Empire knows that we're not afraid. We'll strike at their heart and show them what happens when the people rise up." Yalan looked at the group around him, Kalan, Zara, and the other members of the resistance. We're not just allies, they were a family. They had all come from different worlds, different lives, but now they shared a common goal. And together, they would take on the Empire. As the group gathered their things and prepared for the journey ahead, Yalan couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve settle within him. The road ahead would be difficult, and the Empire's power was vast. But for the first time, Yalan understood what it meant to fight for something greater than himself. The moment of reflection had passed, and the fight for freedom had truly begun. The night had fallen quickly over the city, and the rain continued to fall in heavy sheets, soaking everything in its path. The streets were eerily quiet now, a strange calm before the storm. Yalan stood at the edge of the Resistance safe house, looking out into the darkness. His mind was heavy with the weight of the decision they had made. Tomorrow, they would move out. Tomorrow, they would strike at the heart of the Empire. Behind him, the others were preparing. Weapons were being checked, plans were being finalized, and every moment felt like it was leading up to something bigger than any of them. Zara, who had insisted on being part of the plan despite her past, was sitting with Kalen, speaking quietly with him about the next steps. The bond between them had grown stronger over the past few days. Both of them determined to see this through. Yalan had seen the fire in Zara's eyes when she had first arrived in the safe house. Exhausted, but resolute. She was no longer the prisoner who had stood on the execution block waiting for death. She was a leader, someone who had found her voice again. And that voice would not be silenced by the Empire, but the reality of what they were about to do weighed heavily on Yalan. The Empire's forces were vast. The resistance, though strong, was small in comparison. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. It was easy to talk about fighting back, but the truth was, the Empire wouldn't go down without a fight, and neither would the people who had suffered under its rule for so long. Kalen approached him, his face serious but calm. "We leave at dawn," he said. "We have a small window of opportunity. The Empire's forces will be stretched thin while they search for us, and that's when we strike." Yalan turned to face Kalen, nodding. "What's the plan?" "We hit them fast, hard, and then retreat," Kalen explained. "We don't try to take their capital or dismantle their whole system in one go. That would be suicide. But if we hit key targets, communications, supply lines, power stations, we can cripple them. It's not about winning one battle. It's about showing them that the people are rising up." Jalen's chest tightened as Kalen spoke. He knew the risks. They had to be strategic, calculating, and careful. One mistake and the resistance could be wiped out before they even had a chance to make a difference. But Yalan had made up his mind. He wasn't just fighting for Zara anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced by the Empire. He was fighting for freedom. "I'm ready," Yalan said. His voice was steady, though inside, he still felt the tremors. "Of fear, let's do it." Kalen gave him a nod. "We leave at first light. Get some rest while you can." Yalan knew that sleep wouldn't come easily, but he tried to calm his mind. The plans were set. The path was clear. There was no turning back now. He went to a small corner of the room, lying down on the cold, hard floor. The darkness around him felt suffocating, but in the silence, he allowed himself to think of the people he was fighting for. Zira Kalen, the resistance. The ones who had been oppressed for so long, it was for them that he would give everything. The hours stretched on. Before he knew it, the first light of dawn was creeping through the cracks in the walls. The safe house stirred with activity. As everyone prepared for the mission ahead, Lane stood, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. His hands were steady as he checked his weapon one last time, the familiar weight of it grounding him in reality. Zara was already at the front of the room, speaking to the resistance members, her voice calm and commanding. She had taken on a new role in these past few days, one that suited her strength and determination. She wasn't just an escapee anymore. She was a symbol of resistance, hope for the countless others who had been oppressed by the Empire. "You all know the plan," Sarah said, her voice firm but filled with resolve. "We don't back down. We fight with everything we've got. If we succeed, we send a message to the Empire that they can't ignore. If we fail, we don't go down alone. We go down fighting." The group nodded in agreement, their faces set in determination. Yalan could see the same fire in their eyes that had driven him to step in and save Zara. The desire for change, for justice, burned brightly in each of them. And now, they were all bound together by a common cause as they gathered their things. And prepared to move out, the tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't just another mission. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. The resistance wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future. Jalan walked over to Zara, who was preparing her own gear. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. There was no need for words between them. They both knew what was at stake. "Are you ready?" Zara asked, her voice softer now, as if she could sense the weight of the moment. Pressing down on him, Jal nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." "Then let's make sure this counts," Zara said with a small smile, before turning to Kalen. Who was giving the final instructions? The group moved out quickly. Slipping through the underground tunnels to avoid detection, streets above were still dark, the quiet of the morning broken only by the occasional distant rumble of the Empire's patrols. Jalen's mind raced as they moved closer to their target. They had one shot at this. There would be no second chances. The first target was a communications, Satara, a vital piece of the Empire's infrastructure. If they could shut it down, they would cripple the Empire's ability to coordinate their forces. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to make their strike count. They reached the center without being detected. Moving swiftly through the city's back alleys, Jalen's heart was pounding in his chest, the adrenaline of the mission surging through him. The plan was simple. Get in, destroy the communications array, and get out before the Empire could respond. As they reached the entrance of the center, Yalan felt a surge of excitement. They were about to strike. They were about to make history. The countdown began.